Well, welcome to Christian Answers. This is Pastor Jeff Short, your Bible teacher and cultural commentator. And today we're going to be looking at something that has been in the news recently, but it actually goes back 2 or 3 years to the year 2020 and the election of 2020, presidential election. And it has to deal with a Christian lawyer, Jenna Ellis, a young Christian woman who has taught law at Colorado Christian University out there in Colorado. I used to live in Colorado for a time, and I'm familiar with this Christian college. She taught, I believe, constitutional law at Colorado Christian University. And then she also worked for a Christian organization that defends the rights of pastors and churches. For example, she represented John MacArthur and Grace Community Church in California when they were told by the state of California to stop having services during COVID. Remember that? When the different authorities around the country were telling churches that they couldn't meet and that it would be illegal for them to hold a church service. John MacArthur and his church only closed their church down for, I believe it was 2 or 3 weeks, and then they decided, hey, this is a matter of Christian conscience. We have to have our church meeting as the Lord has commanded us. Do not forsake the assembling of yourselves one with another. In Hebrews, it says that. So John MacArthur began to have church services, and the state of California wanted to sue him and fine him thousands and thousands of dollars and hold him in contempt of the law. And they actually threatened to put him in jail. And so Jenna Ellis and a Christian legal organization represented John MacArthur, and they actually won. So they were able to continue having church services. So she is a Christian advocate. She is personally a Christian, and she's not afraid to get out there and fight for Christians. Well, now she is being sued and taken to court by Georgia district attorney, and in some kind of a witch hunt, some political witch hunt, they want to punish the people who were defending Donald Trump in the 2020 election controversy. Jenna Ellis was defending the view that there are constitutional ways to allow for the different states to hold electors who send alternative electors to Washington and so on and so forth. This is all a legal argument. She was representing her client, Donald Trump, and she was making an argument, a legal argument, that there is precedent and there is legal justification for sending alternative electors in states where the election integrity was disputed. And so she made her arguments. That's what lawyers do. Well, now she's being punished by a politically motivated Democratic political machinery in the state of Georgia, and she is being threatened with jail time. So broadcaster Andrew Klavan is explaining this situation, so I thought it would be helpful to let him explain it and then actually give commentary alongside of his commentary. So let's roll the clip and let Andrew Klavan explain what is happening with Jenna Ellis.
Now, I tell you this because my friend, Jenna Ellis, who was one of the people indicted in this bogus Trump RICO case in Georgia, accepted a plea deal this week to keep herself out of prison. This is something called, it's very hard to understand, this for first offenders in Georgia can get what is sometimes called deferred adjudication. And it means that you plead guilty, but you're not convicted of anything. You're not officially convicted. And if Jenna goes for 3 years without violating the terms of the deal, she'll never be convicted of anything. So she'll have no record or anything like this, which is as opposed to being sent to prison, which was what they were trying to do to her.
Okay, so he's done a very good job in just summarizing what the situation is with this Christian lawyer, Jenna Ellis. Okay, she's a young Christian lawyer. She has her whole career ahead of her. We're talking probably 30, 40, perhaps even 50 years of a legal career ahead of her. And the Georgia district attorney, Democratic controlled, wants to basically throw her in jail and punish her for daring to defend Donald Trump and his argument that there were problems and actual irregularities with the tabulating and counting of votes in certain states, especially in Georgia. And so Jenna Ellis was part of the legal defense team, along with Rudy Giuliani and some others, who were going around from state to state in some of these key battleground states and saying to the legislature there that there are legal grounds for these state legislators to take control of the elections and oversee and overrule even if there are questions about voter integrity. And she was making a case from the Constitution, from legal precedent, and so on and so forth. That's exactly what lawyers always do. They defend their client. And now, because these states ultimately triumphed over her and her defense team against Donald Trump in his argument that there was an election fraud and so on and so forth, she is now being retaliated against. She is being smeared, just like, for example, the so-called insurrectionists of January 6, 2021. These people who were basically escorted into the Capitol by the security guards and wandered through, taking selfies and acting more like tourists than anything else. The Democrats decided they were going to label all of these tourists as insurrectionists, that they were part of an insurrection to overthrow the government, which is pure fabrication. It's outrageous. It's bogus. It's nonsense. And yet these people, these hapless, gullible, naive people who thought just because the security guards were opening the doors and escorting them around, everything would be okay. Little did they know that the Democrats were going to retaliate against him and act like this was like the nation was in the balance, because they almost overthrew the nation. It's so ridiculous. It's stupid. No, this was not an insurrection. During an insurrection, if you're part of an insurrection, you bring your weapons. There were no weapons. If you're part of an insurrection, you kill people. There were no people killed, except there was one person killed, and that was one of the tourists who actually got shot by a policeman, which was totally outlandish. And so the Democrats are retaliating against people that they didn't like doing what they were doing, and this is part of it. Jenna Ellis is now being targeted because she dared to offend the Democratic Party and challenge them, and now she's threatened with actual jail time. And so she made a plea deal to avoid spending years and years in jail. That we never know what it might be, some of these politically motivated political crimes.
She'll probably have to be paraded through Trump's show trial and testify against him in a very unpleasant way, a way that I'm sure she's not going to feel very good about. And I'm sure, well, you can see from this little clip where she had to make this statement in court, she obviously doesn't feel great about having to do this.
I endeavored to represent my client to the best of my ability. I relied on others, including lawyers with many more years of experience than I, to provide me with true and reliable information, especially since my role involved speaking to the media and to legislators in various states. What I did not do, but should have done, Your Honor, was to make sure that the facts the other lawyers alleged to be true were in fact true. In the frenetic pace of attempting to raise challenges to the election in several states, including Georgia, I failed to do my due diligence.
So I'm not a lawyer, but this case seems destined to collapse on appeal. It's absurd. The prosecutor, Fani Willis, obviously a biased Democrat, is basically using the state's RICO Act, the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, and applying it to lawyers representing a client. So this means that if I'm a gangster, that's what these laws are made for. They're made to get gangsters who you can never get because they have ways of communicating and the feds can't figure it out. So they basically said if you arrange to commit crimes, all the people who conspired to commit crimes, who were in this criminal conspiracy, could be indicted and tried and convicted as part of basically a criminal organization. But to say that a lawyer who says something, who brings her client's dishonest plea before a court is conspiring and racketeering is garbage, right? I mean, Johnny Cochran would have to be a gangster convicted under RICO for saying that OJ was innocent when everybody knew the guy was guilty. People deserve representation. Donald Trump deserved representation. And Jenna gave him that representation and now is being forced to plead guilty to something for doing that. And it's absurd.
Yeah, and so she is being forced, pretty much of necessity, to plead guilty. Now, there were Christians and there were conservatives who were actually criticizing her and saying, oh, what a coward. She didn't even believe in what she was talking about or representing, and this is such a cowardly act. She's not being true to herself, and she's not. Well, you have to remember that because of these corrupt politicians in Georgia and this DA and Clavin says that he thinks that this will all be dismissed eventually on appeal, that these bogus charges against the lawyers representing their client through this RICO Act, they're trying to go after anyone connected with Donald Trump, who they're after Donald Trump ultimately, of course, and we see all of the different charges brought against him in New York by, again, a district attorney who is a radical liberal, George Soros, radical leftist attorney who is trying to basically hang Donald Trump and throw him into prison because they hate his guts. They've always hated his guts. They can't stand him. This is called Trump derangement syndrome. And people have some kind of visceral hatred and revulsion to Donald Trump. Okay, they can have that. But now when they go the step in starting to bring political and legal charges against him because they don't like him, or they don't like what he says, or they don't like how he says it, or they don't like his stands on issues, and they want to get him out of politics. That's basically what they're trying to do. They are trying to remove a political opponent of the Democrats from the 2024 presidential election. And they don't want Donald Trump running because they're afraid that he actually might win. So they're going after him with every petty little legal reason that they can come at him, hoping that if they just pile up enough charges against Donald Trump, they can get him thrown in jail or they can get him taken off the election ballot, and then their guy will win. And it's pure politics, 100%. Nothing has ever happened like this before in political history, where the opposition party goes after their opponent for the presidential election in this way to try to knock him out of the race and try to throw him into jail. So the vindictiveness and the hatred on the Democratic left is so high that they're willing to distort our whole legal system and commit all kinds of legal travesties to try to get Donald Trump thrown in jail. Donald Trump thrown in jail. Now, what they're doing is they're not stopping with Donald Trump. They're trying to punish everyone who helped him in any way possible, and especially the lawyers who helped him. So now they're going after Jenna Ellis. And unfortunately, what has happened is that Donald Trump is not in any way trying to help Jenna Ellis or any of these other lawyers with any of his resources. He's a billionaire and he has plenty of money, but he's not trying to help them in any way get off of these bogus charges. And so Jenna Ellis is left to herself and a few dollars that some people have contributed to her. And so she was facing, we're talking prison time. This is so outrageous. She's representing Donald Trump, her client, and she's now facing prison time for representing him, for arguing in his favor in a court case before the legislators of these states. There's nothing illegal wrong with arguing a court case. She didn't threaten anybody. She didn't do any crime, but she argued for his side of the story, which was that there was widespread voter fraud, which I guess we'll never get to the bottom of that because the Democrats have no interest in getting to the bottom of it. In fact, they suppress speech on the internet and Google and all over the place. And now they're coming after the lawyers who argued that case, Jenna Ellis, and trying to throw her in jail. And she was really basically facing jail time and prison time. And so, yeah, she copped a deal. She copped a plea, as they call it. She basically agreed to admit some kind of guilt, and just to avoid having to spend time in prison. I mean, this is serious stuff. They're really coming after, in a very vindictive way, their opponents. And so as Christians, we have to be aware of this. Look, this is called totalitarian tyranny. And they did it in Soviet Union under communism all the time. Well, we're seeing the totalitarians in the Democrat left doing that same thing. And we have to be aware of this, that as a pastor, if you're listening, you may get thrown in jail and you may get railroaded on some bogus charge. But if they've got the power, they can do it. So we need to be aware that this actually happens in the United States in the year 2023.
So I'm almost sure, like I said, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm almost sure this will be overturned on appeal. But having said that, I would bet cash money, and I'm not a betting man, that Trump will be convicted and that Jenna would have been convicted and sent to prison. And I believe Trump will do time for this because, first of all, the jury pool in this area is 75% Democrat. So that's who the jury is going to be. The jury is going to be a bunch of Democrats out for blood, out to get Trump. But also, juries don't really decide these questions, right? They don't really decide, well, it's not fair to apply the RICO Act to lawyers. That's something that judges do on appeal. So Jenna is a young attorney, no connections. She finds herself representing the president of the United States. Who among us would turn down that job? She finds herself facing a massively powerful, corrupt entity, which is the Department of Justice of the state of Georgia. This is a...
Right. We're talking about corrupt politicians targeting people for political reasons. So Jenna Ellis is a lawyer representing Donald Trump, making the argument that these election laws that were changed radically in the year 2020 under the guise of COVID-19. See, remember that? Under the guise of COVID-19, all of these liberal states changed all of their laws, started allowing all kinds of massive mail-in ballots, flooding the population with these mail-in ballots. You don't have to show ID. You don't have to show any proof. You just mail these things in, and willy-nilly, you all of a sudden have all of these ballots floating around. And the ID laws, the restriction, you have to qualify to a certain extent to be able to vote. You have to get your paperwork in, and you have to meet the qualifications of citizenship and all kinds of things thrown out the window. And the Democrats capitalized on this to recruit all kinds of people and do all kinds of shenanigans. And Donald Trump had an argument that these new radical election laws that were changed at the last moment were illegal. And Jenna Ellis was arguing that they were illegal. And now she is being targeted for political prosecution by her opponents just because she's representing Donald Trump. And she was afraid that she might have to spend, and who knows how many years she would have to spend. They're throwing the 9/11 tourist of the Capitol in prison for 10 years or so, in some cases, for just their little walk through the Capitol, and making a big deal about that like it was some big insurrection, revolution, and the worst thing to happen since 9/11 and so forth. Just absurd claims. They're throwing these people in for many years, and Jenna Ellis, who knows what some judge might say. She might be stuck in prison for 15 years. And she said, yeah, sure, I'm gonna do a plea deal. And she did it. And probably didn't feel good about it, but she did it to save her life and career.
Corrupt entity coming after her because they're coming after Donald Trump, and she's in the way. And That's on one side of her. And on the other side of her is Trump, who has no, even if you love Trump, even if you're MAGA, Trump has no loyalty to anyone whatsoever. It's not that he's not nice to many people. It's that he does not care. If you turn, when Bibi Netanyahu called Joe Biden and congratulated him, that was it for Trump. Trump said, F Bibi, forget him, and he hated him. Now, this news came out, and I'm watching it on social media. And as I say, Jenna's a friend, so it's personal, but people start screaming at her. They start screaming, oh, I wouldn't have done this. This is, you've got to stand, you're a coward, you're all this stuff. They claim because she fundraised $200,000 to pay for her legal fees. They say, oh, she just stole the money. She never saw that money. Went right to her lawyers completely. Anyone who knows anything about this stuff knows that money was gone in about 20 minutes. She's never seen it. She's never touched it. It has nothing to do with her. Her lawyers say this. Now, the reason I brought up this first thing about the small, I know the sacrifices I made are not, didn't parachute into enemy lines, but there were things that I cared about. I gave up some major dreams, major ambitions in my life, some major coin to say the things that I thought were true and to stand up for my country when my country was under fire. And these are things that you do if you want to be a man of integrity. I think a lot of people do them. I'm not, not saying oh my gosh, I'm like a sterling individual. I'm just saying I have that behind me. I can tell you, I have no idea what I would have done in Jenna's situation. I'm sure she feels bad about it. Both ideas, going to prison and taking this plea and having to stand up and maybe testify against Trump, both of those things are not good things, right? That's a rock and a hard place. But I have no idea what I would have done. And I was kind of appalled, not surprised at all, but I was appalled at the viciousness of conservatives on whose side she is attacking her, saying, oh, I would have gone to the wall. I would have done this and I would have done that. I'm just saying, as a man who has done a little bit of this and that, I have no idea what I would have done in that situation. Who would she be going to prison for? Trump? I mean, Trump's not going to go to prison for her. If Trump could throw her under the bus to get out of prison, he would. Why would she do that? I can see principles that she might have thought, I'll stand up for this, but how can you say, Michael Flynn, an Army lieutenant general who once defied orders in order to jump off a 40-foot cliff into the ocean and rescue two soldiers who were drowning off the coast of Grenada, pled guilty to a totally bogus charge of lying to the FBI to protect himself and his family. You have no idea the kind of power you're up against when you're up against the law and when the law is corrupt, as I believe it is in this case. And if you think you're tougher than Flynn, if you think you're stronger, more heroic, more of a martyr than Jenna, I think you're living in a fantasy world. I think you are living online, basically, in your own mind and have no idea. I mean, even if you've done courageous things before, you don't know if you'll do courageous things the next time.
Yeah, that's a good point. And so before we judge Jenna Ellis, this Christian lawyer who represented Donald Trump, but who has also represented pastors like John MacArthur and Grace Community Church against the state of California, again, against liberals. She has always been fighting this liberal totalitarian control, and she's done it in many different forms. And when Donald Trump called upon her to defend his claim that there was election fraud, it was her duty to try to gather up all the evidence that she could from all different sources to try to find that there was, in fact, election fraud. And, at this point, again, who really knows what happened in the elections of 2020? If you read a book, for example, by Molly Hemingway called, I believe it's called Rigged, you'll find all of the different ways in which the election laws were changed in 2020 and how many of these laws were changed in favor of the Democratic Party, no question. And so Donald Trump was objecting to the way that these election laws were changed. He was also objecting to the way the elections were conducted and the controlling aspects by these liberal cities where, for example, a lot of the auditors and observers were not allowed in at the time of the counting of the election, and so on and so forth. There's all kinds of irregularities. We can just spend the whole time talking about those. But she brought together all of those evidences and presented them to the state legislatures and basically argued that they need to intervene and review this evidence themselves before they release these electors to go to the Capitol and certify. And that's a perfectly valid legal argument. Okay, she lost. The Capitol did not allow these alternative electors, and that legal argument failed. Okay, that's what lawyers do. They make arguments. Sometimes their arguments fail. But you don't then, the opponents don't come after them and say, okay, we're going to throw you into jail for making those arguments because we hate your argument, or you are linked to Donald Trump and we hate Donald Trump, so we're going to go after you. This is pure political totalitarianism, and we had better get used to it, because if this goes forward, we're going to be affected by this kind of activity.
You know, you just don't know in any given moment what the situation will be, what the odds will be, what the cost will be, and to whom that cost, who will have to pay that cost. So this is my central point today. This is what I want to talk about today. The human mind has been accessible to deception since the Garden of Eden. There is something in the human mind that will deceive itself if it's not already deceived. It will take little statues for gods. It'll take money for important, things. It'll take applause for love. It'll make all kinds of mistakes. And the human mind is a self-deceiving machine. And right now, with the internet so ubiquitous, so ever-present, with ourselves spending so much time staring into a machine where the information is impossible to parse, we are all of us being sucked into this mega-world tar pit of lies, and it is the genuine prime danger to our country. It's not Democrats, it's not this, it's not that. It is the lies that we are all living in, the absolute deception, the atmosphere of deception and fantasy that surrounds us and that we're part of. Some of it is obvious. Take pornography, that replaces the love of men and women, and it replaces that with shapes projected from the imagination onto the screen. And I've heard guys say, no, I'd rather do this. It's safer. You don't have to deal with women. Women are greedy and all this stuff. And a lot of boys look at this stuff long enough and they find they actually can have sex with a genuine human being because they are lost, immersed, sunk into that tar of deception that is pornography. Transgenderism, another example. I mean, on the surface, if you think about it, there's no reason boys dressing up as girls should necessarily lead to oppression and violence, but it does, because to live in lies definitely will make you oppressed and will make you violent. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services has now imposed a transgender pronoun mandate on its employees. So there's a guidance instructs employees that you must affirm any coworker's self-proclaimed gender identity and preferred pronouns. That means the government is forcing you to lie. This is how Jordan Peterson got into all this trouble, because he refused to do it. The government is forcing you to tell the lie that men can become women.
And he's going to go on and talk about all kinds of different instances where there are lies being floated around in our culture, on the internet, and now being enforced by the United States government. So as Christians, we have to be aware. And of course, if we read our Bible, we understand it talks about the devil is a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. He prowls around, seeking whom he may devour. We know that the devil is the father of all lies. We know that we are surrounded by devils and demons, and they're spreading lies as quickly as they can. They deceive other people, and then those people deceive us. But we have to be aware of this. We have to realize that we live in a fallen world, and that we cannot totally trust any source outside coming to us from the internet or from the television or the radio or newspapers, that there are lies being weaponized for political purposes. And, Jenna Ellis is a casualty of war. And I don't judge her for copping a plea deal, for mouthing words and saying, yes, I'm guilty in this and that and the other, just to avoid being in prison. But we need to pray, stand strong, and not allow the lies to influence us. And we'll talk to you next week on another edition. God bless.